Hi, everybody. Thank you all for joining today. If you have any questions as we go through this webinar, please just type them into the questions box on your screen, and we'll be sure to get those answered at the end. With that being said, I'm going to kick it over to Shawn Litchfield, who's the Regional Vice President at P3 Propane Safety.
Awesome. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, everybody, for joining here. We'll be talking about the 3 reasons safety inspection should include the home's interior, but kind of getting into a little more detail than just that. Today, we've got Paul Craver joining us, Senior Safety Consultant with P3. Paul, I can see we're both a little more tan than the last time we saw each other, which is good. With that said, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your propane safety credentials, so to speak?
All right. So back in 2001, I started delivering gas. I knew nothing about delivering propane. Didn't know anything about the product. It kind of basically gave me the keys to the truck and a stack of tickets and go for it. You fast forward about 14 years. I ended up transitioning after being a service technician, district manager, over to the safety department for that employer. And I spent the better part of 8 years in the safety department, from safety advisor to safety manager to a division safety director. And then I was snatched up by the folks at P3, which I'm very pleased about. And here I am. So that's basically it.
You're perfect. All right. Well, again, kind of what we're here to talk about today, I think we hear it a lot, right? Where it's we don't go into the house as a propane marketer, and there are a lot of reasons that should take place. Having to do with anything from making sure you're leak checking the whole system, identifying issues with appliances, and putting things back into services from a tag perspective. And I know you've got a lot of stories out there that are not good ones, unfortunately, because incidents occur when things aren't done the right way, or things are overlooked, or not looked into, whichever way you want to look at that. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the things you see, Paul, and what that's led to, but also the proper way of going about those types of things.
Sure. So, whenever you have like an interruption of service or some type of safety inspection, in my opinion, it is paramount that you go inside that structure and you make a few verifications. One of those is something as simple as making sure that sediment traps and shutoffs are installed where they're supposed to be. But there's a lot more out there that's a lot more scary than that. For example, appliances like a water heater that's simply not vented. It's just opening up into the living room or wherever it is that's installed. Could be gas lines that are active, but they're not attached to an appliance. Maybe someone moved out, had a gas range, and then somebody new moves in, they put in an electric range. And one of the stories that Brent likes to talk about is that exact situation where someone just stuck a potato on the end of the gas line and called that good. Now eventually that potato dries out, gas is leaking into the structure. I think there was no shutoff installed on that. So that was the answer to it. But anyway, when you go inside a building, there's a few things that you really need to be looking for. And again, that's things like unvented appliances that should be vented. Things like those gas lines that are active. You have to observe these things. And on top of that, when you're thinking about like performing a leak check, on and out of gas, a lot of companies, not a lot, but there's certain companies out there that they just do not go inside a building. And if you don't go inside, you can't verify that you're even leak checking the entire vapor distribution system, because customers can do things. They can maybe shut off a section, maybe leading to a fireplace in another room, because maybe they were doing some work on it. In fact, that happened in Western Maryland. I'm going to say about 10 years ago. Out of gas, employee did the leak check. Nobody was home, so he just assumed everything was good and left. Customer come home later. He was pleased. He had gas in his 200-pound cylinder now. Now he could go ahead and finish that repair on his fireplace that he had in his master bedroom. Well, that line to the master bedroom had been disconnected or had been turned off, so it wasn't part of the leak check. He turns it back on, ends up, blowing up the house and himself as a result. And, ultimately, I don't know exactly where that landed in litigation, but I know it went on for years, and nobody has time for that, right? So, you want to make sure that you really go inside, check these things, to protect yourself, protect your customer, because we are the gas professionals, after all, and the things that we know and can see, customer may not know about. I do have one more story about an explosion that happened out in Nebraska, where an open gas line was left. It was in the closed position, but there was no plug or cap at the end, and it terminated near the furnace. And it was left that way. The pilots weren't lit on the furnace. That gas line was left there uncapped, and the previous homeowner was trying to talk the new homeowner through lighting that furnace, and it told the young lady to go ahead and open the gas line. Well, she opened the gas line that wasn't attached to anything, and ended up the house exploded. There were 2 fatalities and another person with severe burns. So, in the long story short, when you go inside, you got to look for these egregious, these sometimes obvious situations, but you can't see that from the outside. And most of our customers or companies that supply propane really pride themselves on how safe they are. While something may not be necessarily required by code, for example, doesn't mean it doesn't make sense. And going inside during these situations certainly makes sense to me.
Yeah, and I think you obviously bring up some terrible stories, but it's just the reality of what it is out there. And I think there's kind of 2 different things we touched on there, right? There's the safety inspection where why not go into the house, gather that information, and make sure that those appliances are installed properly and not missing any of those things, because you're just doing that really at that time, right? You're taking on the new account, move in, move out, brand new customer, whatever it is at the property. That's your chance to get all that stuff. And at the same time, as you can see on the screen I'm sharing here, where you can, or do you have any uncapped gas lines? Yes or no, that kind of thing. So easy to do just once on the front end.
Absolutely. I just can't stress it enough. It's so important to protecting your company down the road, just to go in and make sure you're leak checking the whole system. Make sure that there's no uncapped gas lines. And P3 does make it pretty easy to document situations where maybe you come across, an uncapped gas line, and you don't have a plug or a cap, but you can turn it off, tag it out, and identify that in P3. You can tag out an entire system in P3. So it works out real well. You can take pictures through P3 as well to prove that you've done what you said you did.
I think when, if you come across that scenario where, like an out of gas, we did talk about that one earlier as well, and you've got a drop in pressure. Well, sure enough, there we go. I've got a drop in pressure, but yes, the reality is that's what happened. And to your point, Paul, here's where I can add that tag information according to whether it was a container or an appliance. So give me an example of, a situation, I guess, that we could use for maybe an appliance that I gotta.
Oh, sure. Well, we're doing an employee doing a leak check. Maybe it was out of gas and there was a drop in pressure. So this driver or technician has the skill set at the time that they're there to start, testing different portions of the system to see where the leak in fact is. And they've determined that the leak is somewhere behind the customer's cooking range, right? Now there's a branch leading to that range, and they can turn it off. So they turn it off, whether it's the shut off at the range or somewhere prior to that upstream, but they isolate that section of pipe. So they perform the leak check again and have determined now it passes. But you got to have a tag where you've shut that gas off, to basically communicate a risk to the customer, right? You got to show them, hey, I've got to tag this line out. You fill out the form, you go ahead and have the customer sign it, acknowledge it. They get a copy of it. You get a copy of it. A lot of companies like taking a picture of that in place, and I would highly recommend that as well, because in a lot of cases the customer will just remove that tag 5 minutes after you leave. But you want to have, proof that you've communicated the risk to the customer. And then at that point, the customer can go ahead and get that leak fixed and then call you back up, and you can go back out and document a full leak check on the entire system, take the tag out, and go from there. And you can do all the documentation other than the physical tag itself right through P3.
Great. And to your point, so we'll move on. And, this being a dynamic form, it's going to document what was documented. And what I mean by that is if I did something with a regulator, I'm going to see it there. But I did something with this appliance, we added the tag, it specifically documents that scenario, allows us to ideally get a customer signature in these scenarios. And I think we had talked about this too, where not everybody also knows when customers should be home or not, right? For certain services, the safety inspection, I think, is a absolute must in my personal opinion. I don't know about your professional opinion, Paul, but that's one. And then I think out of gas is another one that would make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Both scenarios, it's a slam dunk that, someone should be home. Not just to sign the paperwork, but, for example, during that safety inspection, most companies going to show, that customer, here's how you turn the gas off in case of an emergency. Here's what propane smells like. Here's where you'll find the phone number on the decal on side of the tank if you need to get a hold of us in an emergency. Doing that without the customer home, they don't get that information. Even the leak check when no one's home. You just don't know that you're leak checking the entire system. So having access to the home, preferably with someone there, is ideal. Now, as a manager, I have allowed employees to go in when someone's not home with the customer's permission. A lot of people are uncomfortable with that, and I would certainly never put an employee in that position if they were uncomfortable with it. But I just go do it myself. But I worked in a lot of seasonal areas, whether it's the Delaware beaches or up in Maine or the south coast of Massachusetts. And you'd be surprised how many customers gave me keys to the house just so we could go in if they're out of town, or, that being that it's seasonal, they're only there a few months of the year, that we could come in and help, rectify a situation. It happens a lot. But again, I wouldn't put an employee who was uncomfortable in that position to do it.
Yeah. I think too, it just, to me, it also sounds like, and all these things tie together. What are your company policies and procedures for these types of things, right? You need to have those written so that everyone understands what those are.
Absolutely. Those company policies and procedures are a roadmap for your employees to perform jobs and tasks as your company wants them to be done. It's exactly that. It's a roadmap, and can be used as a training tool in addition to that.
Yep. Now, the other thing I just wanted to add by sharing the screen was, the following up on those tagged items. And it's, again, something P3 can help with and make simple, where any tagged item is going to be on your dashboard so that we can understand what follow-up needs to be done and take that appropriate follow-up and document it the right way. So, a bunch of different ways that, again, the documentation side will tie in on P3, but still a lot of it, Paul, to your point, is what we just mentioned, is what is the company policy procedure? What are we doing when these things occur? And understanding the dangers if we don't, because you talked about a few stories that, it's just not, they're not good stories. Terrible for the family. So I think doing things the right way, documenting things the right way, and, having those policies in place is critical to doing business the right way. And I don't know, Paul, if you've got anything you want to add here before we kind of wrap things up.
I do. I spent some time in Fort Lauderdale a few weeks ago with a trainers conference, and there's an attorney that works in the industry quite a lot, and he basically said, you can do things just because it's code, right? Or you can do it just because it's policy. But there are things that are not codes and not policies that are simply the right thing to do. And, for example, going in the house and verifying, right? That's the right thing to do. In my opinion, it's not a code that you have to go inside, but the code does say if you're leak checking, you have to leak check the entire system. How do you know, right? Unless you go inside. So I don't think that, taking that little extra step to confirm that your leak check, for example, is 100% as it should be, is a lot to ask. I know, this isn't always a popular discussion among some companies, but I'm going to never waver on my recommendation that we go inside when you're doing leak checks, safety inspections, and things like that.
Yep, no, that's good. And Emma, any questions that have come in?
Yeah, it does look like one came in. So if you see an appliance without a shutoff valve or drip leg, what action should I take? Those do not pose an immediate threat, but should be resolved. Is it okay to have the customer acknowledge the issue and leave the appliance on?
Yeah, those are not what I would call, risks that are like destined to happen, right? And something bad is not completely going to happen down the road, but it's something that isn't code and should be rectified. Former employers that I've worked for, we would identify that risk to the customer. We would tag it with a tag, but we wouldn't turn it off. Since it wasn't a huge risk at that point, but it is a code violation. You definitely want to work towards getting all those resolved.
Great.
Okay, awesome. Another one, should we require someone to be home if there is an out of gas?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend someone home, whether it's someone who lives there, neighbor, whomever. Absolutely, because they really need to let somebody in so you can go in and look at all the appliances, make sure you're leak checking the entire system. Like I said earlier, I mean, there is the option of someone letting you in. Other than that, but it's not as desirable as having the homeowner there.
Okay, awesome. Another one. So when should you tag something out versus lock a tank off? And where can I find these tags if we don't currently have them?
So locking out a tank. So if you're locking out a tank, there's a couple of reasons possibly. The one that stands out or jumps right out at me is this is a simple system where maybe one appliance, there's one gas line, there's an issue you can't resolve. The easiest way to make that safe is to lock out the tank, put a tag on it to identify that risk. Now, maybe this was a more complicated system where you've got hot water, heat, cooking, dryer, fireplace, and you diagnose that there's a gas leak leading to the cooking range, right? And you're able to isolate that. You would want to tag that at the point you make that line safe and then complete a leak check of the system that is active at that point in time so that that part of the system is safe and the part that isn't is tagged out. It's locked out, tagged out. Some companies, if you can disconnect the line and put a plug in it, that's the ideal situation. Sometimes it's just a matter of closing the shutoff and tagging that shutoff as a danger with a danger tag so that the customer is aware you should not open that tag or open that valve.
We also, so this, I think there's so many overlapping, not questions, but just ways of answering these questions. So, one would be, we talked about out of gas, you want somebody home there in these scenarios. There are a lot of customers that just refuse that access to a company. Do you have a recommendation for that, and is that kind of when the tag scenario and lockouts?
Yeah, well, that's definitely where the tank scenario comes into play. If it's a company-owned tank and I'm not allowed access, and it's my policy to do so, I'm going to lock out the tank. So one of two things is going to happen. They're going to either allow us to go inside and perform our leak check as our company policy dictates, or they find another propane supplier. I wouldn't waver on that. It's pretty simple as that. I know there was another aspect to that question, which was where could we order these tags? And that actually, through the PERC website, you can order all sorts of different tags, but they have danger tags, for example, where you can identify where something's been made safe, whether it's locking out a tank or disconnecting an appliance.
Okay. Emma, anything else?
It looks like, so Is there a requirement whether you complete a leak test on the first stage regulator or a second stage on the low pressure side?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Yeah. So is there a requirement whether you complete a leak test on a first stage regulator or a second stage on the low pressure side?
No. NFPA 54 and 58 give, in Annex C, give examples of how to perform a leak check, and they include doing leak checks at the first stage or the second stage or at the service valve. But NFPA 54 basically says you've got to perform a leak check in the code part, but doesn't exactly tell you how. But my recommendation is just perform one, whether it's on the second stage or the first stage. It really doesn't matter to me. They both seem to work very well. I don't have a preference, and just make sure they're done.
I want to just to add to that too, and this is the terminology thing, and maybe it came through incorrectly, but I think leak test was the question, right, Paul? And then leak check is really what was being referred to there. Maybe you could just talk briefly about just why that is out there.
Absolutely. I've probably talked about this for 1,000 times over the last 10 years, but there are three terms in the industry that get thrown about and used interchangeably. Leak check is one, leak test is one, and pressure test is one. You know, what Shawn calls a leak test, I might call a leak check, what Emma might call a pressure test. But the fact of the matter is, what's really bad about that is those three terms or three tests do exist in the code books, but they're all different, okay? A leak check is something that's performed with a gauge to prove that a system is leak-free, right after installation, prior to, activating the system, or when there's been an interruption of service. And again, obviously, most companies will perform when there's like an odor complaint, for example. A leak test is when you're trying to pinpoint a leak. Perhaps you've done a leak check, you've got a leak, and now you're trying to find it. So the leak test is utilizing things like a combustible gas detector or leak detector solution to pinpoint that leak so you can make the repair and then perform a follow-up leak check to prove it's leak-free. Pressure test, also misused, is basically a test performed on newly installed or modified gas piping to prove at a higher pressure than operating pressure that the pipe is good. Okay. Once you've done that with like air, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, but air is typically how we do it. You pump up like anything downstream of the second stage regulator to 1.5 times the working pressure or a minimum of 3 psi. That's all done before you do a leak check, though, because you have to do it before you install the piping, the shutoffs, and things of that nature. And if anybody on the call wants to talk more about that or needs any training about that, be sure to reach out. I'd be more than happy to help.
Yeah, awesome, Paul, and thank you. And this is great. We're getting some great attendee engagement. I got another question on my end, asking if flow and lockup is required when you're doing an interruption of service or just a leak check. They've heard that it could be considered a best practice, but ask kind of what code actually says about that.
Actually, code is pretty silent on flow and lockup, to be honest with you. It's the regulator manufacturers that are requiring that. And honestly, whether it's code or not, you should be doing it. You want to make sure your regulator manufacturer's warranty is going to be valid. And you also want to make sure that the piping that you've installed, the regulator you've installed, are sized correctly and actually do lock up when they're required to do so. But I think the initial question was from out of service, and no, it's not required when you have an out of gas situation. Flow and lockup is typically reserved for a new install of a regulator, or swapping out an expired regulator or an old regulator with a new one. You want to do a flow and lockup. If you change anything about the system, like add piping, remove piping, add or remove appliances, change appliances, anytime you change that system, you're going to want to make sure that everything's operating to its optimum performance and getting the gas that it needs, and will lock up at a pressure that's not too high.
Okay, thank you. And then we get another one mentioning, would having a customer sign a waiver saying that they have denied access to the home take responsibility for anything inside the home be an acceptable way to continue service and not lock out the tank?
I'm not a lawyer, so I really don't feel comfortable answering that question, to be honest with you. You never know what direction these things are going to go.
Yeah, I think that's a hard thing to answer, and I'd agree. I don't want to be putting anything out there, but I think they're going to find a way. A good lawyer would find a way to still hold you liable, considering you're the expert, so to speak. And it's hard. It's like to your point earlier too, Paul. I think you had said maybe fire the customer in certain examples to be a safer company and not deal with that kind of liability. It's hard. It can be a business decision, but also a policy and procedure that should probably be in place.
Absolutely. I've fired more than I can remember. If they don't
Yeah.
want to play by the rules, I don't really have time for that. All it takes is one bad incident to tie you up for potentially years worth of sitting in a chair talking to lawyers, and I don't have time for that.
Yeah, agreed. Emma, questions?
Yeah, that looks like we went through all of them.
Awesome. Well, I know we're a little bit longer than our standard webinar, we try to keep to around 20 minutes. But for those that hung in, appreciate all the questions that brought us here. And Paul, thank you for your time. Emma, appreciate everything. If anybody does have anything they want to follow up on, please feel free to reach out to either the Propane Safety Consultant team, your P3 consultants that are out there managing the accounts, or visit our website, p3propane.com, and you can contact us through that as well. So, Paul, you all good?
I'm good.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Emma.
Thank
Have a great
you.
day.